All present, please rise. Please be seated.
We are here this morning in the case of State of West Virginia versus Rachel Shoaf, defendant. It is case number 13F88. This matter is set for sentencing. The record will reflect the presence of the State of West Virginia by Marcia Ashdown, prosecuting attorney, Harry DeChristopher, assistant prosecuting attorney, reflect the presence of the defendant, Rachel Shoaf, in person, and by counsel John Angotti and David Straffus. Are the parties ready to proceed? Ms. Ashdown?
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Angotti. Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. Prior to the hearing, the court has received and reviewed various documents which I will outline at this time. First, I have received and reviewed a pre-sentence investigation report submitted June 13, 2013 by the probation office. Ms. Ashdown, have you received a copy of the pre-sentence investigation report and had an opportunity to review it?
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Angotti, have you also received a copy of the pre-sentence investigation report and had an opportunity to review it with Ms. Shoaf?
Your Honor, we have, and we've also provided to the family.
Thank you. In the process of reviewing that, did you find anything that needed to be corrected or otherwise modified?
There's no additions, deletions, or corrections.
That report then will be accepted as submitted. The court has also received, pursuant to the order entered at the plea hearing, a comprehensive diagnostic evaluation provided by Youth Services System, Inc., and received on December 19, 2013. Ms. Ashdown, have you received a copy of that report and had an opportunity to review it?
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Angotti, have you also received a copy of that report and had an opportunity to review it with Ms. Shoaf?
Yes, Your Honor.
In addition, I have received and reviewed a see what it's called here. It would be another or a different psychological report prepared and submitted by Patricia M. Bailey, Ph.D., reflecting the results of her evaluation of the defendant, Rachel Shoaf. I believe I received that yesterday, February 25. Ms. Ashdown, have you received a copy of that report and had an opportunity to review it?
Yes, Mr. Angotti provided that to us, Your Honor.
Very well. Mr. Angotti, I assume you have received a copy of that report since you provided it to me?
That is correct, Your Honor.
Okay. In addition, I have received from counsel for the defendant the following letters. I'm going to start with the last one received. I received one yesterday from a Dr. Mark Ellis. On February 20, 2014, I received letters from Lauren Dean, Kelly Dando Kearns, Gregory A. Kittredge, Richard Kyer, Betsy S. Yatiskel, Arthur and Sylvia Morris, Jody K. Everhard, I believe it's Jamie C. Schussler, Patricia and Rusty Shoaf, and Mark S. Thrash. Those are what I would consider character references for the defendant, Rachel Shoaf. I have reviewed each of those letters. Ms. Ashdown, have you also received copies of those letters?
Have received them and read them.
Very well. Mr. Angotti, you submitted them, so I assume you've also received them and read them.
That is correct, Your Honor.
For what it's worth, and actually not much in the eyes of the court, I did receive yesterday the report of an incident, an incident report from an incident that occurred on February 22nd, at the juvenile facility where Ms. Shoaf is currently residing. I believe, Ms. Ashdown, a copy of that was provided to you.
Correct, Your Honor.
And Mr. Angotti, I think I sent you a copy also yesterday.
You did, Your Honor. We received it and provided a copy to Rachel.
Okay. All right, I believe that reflects everything that the court has received since the plea hearing and today.
Your Honor, may we approach your bench for one?
Yes, sir. If you wish. I don't know if this microphone is still alive. I can kill this one. Got anything that you wish to offer by way of testimony, proffer, or statement before sentencing in this matter?
Yes, Your Honor. Rachel would like to speak to the court first, and then I would like to follow up after she's finished with her statement.
Okay, very well. Ms. Shoaf, I would advise you at this time, if your right to allocution, simply stated that is your right to make any statement that you may wish the court to consider before it passes sentence in this matter. You may speak at this time. You can remain seated if you want. Well, I guess you're not on a rolling chair, so I'd say fine.
I'm so sorry. I don't know if there's a proper way to make this apology, because there are not even words to describe the guilt and remorse that I feel each day for what I've done. The person that did that was not the real me, not the person I am, not what I'm made of, and not what I believe in. I don't think I ever thought that this would actually happen. I became scared and caught up in something that I did not want to do. I never realized the gravity of my actions and how many people I've hurt. I hurt the Neese family and those who love Skylar. I hurt my parents and shamed my family. I hurt my extended family and all of my friends who loved me. I hurt my teachers and those who believed in me. I hurt my church family, my community, and those who trusted me. And I hurt my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. May God bring eternal peace to Skylar and the entire Neese family. Again, I'm so sorry, and I pray each day for everyone involved, and I pray each day for forgiveness.
Yes, Your Honor. Well, Your Honor, there's nothing that I can say here today that would take away the pain and the heartache that the Neese family has and will endure. I further wish in no way to offend the Neese family by my statements here today, nor will I attempt to excuse or minimize the actions of Rachel Shoaf that took the life of Skylar Neese. The one thing I can say to this court and to the community is Rachel has accepted full and complete responsibility for her actions and expressed sincere remorse for what she has done. It is my belief, knowing the facts as I do, that this case would not have been resolved without the confession and cooperation of Rachel. Her confession, cooperation with the state and federal authorities has brought closure to this tragedy. Further, it's my belief that Sheila Eddy would not have pled guilty to first-degree murder without the confession of Rachel Shoaf, and it would have caused the Neese family to endure a painful trial. As the court's aware, pursuant to the plea agreement under paragraph 4, it's anticipated that the state is going to request a sentence of 20 years of incarceration for Rachel Shoaf. However, also in the plea, it was anticipated that we would ask this court to sentence Rachel as a juvenile pursuant to West Virginia Code. And we're making that request. Further, it's my understanding of the law that because Rachel is currently only 17 years of age, that she remain in the juvenile detention facility until she attains the age of 18, and then pursuant to state law, she would be returned to this court for the purpose of a reconsideration and/or modification of any sentence that this court may impose. We are requesting that ultimately, whether it's today or at a future hearing, that she be sentenced as a juvenile and allow her to remain in the juvenile detention facility until she attains the age of 21 years of age. As the court previously stated, the family has retained Dr. Patricia Bailey to perform an evaluation and an exam and actually to treat Rachel because of these unfortunate circumstances. Dr. Bailey, in her recommendation, concurs that Rachel has accepted full and complete responsibility for her actions and has expressed genuine remorse and empathy for the Neese family. Dr. Bailey's recommendations are as follows: that Rachel remain at the Northern Regional Juvenile Detention Facility until the age of 21. That she continue with her treatment, her psychological treatment, while at the facility in Wheeling. Further, given that Rachel provided testimony and agreed to testify against Sheila Eddy, it is her opinion that it would be detrimental to place Rachel Shoaf in a detention facility or prison with Sheila Eddy. We're asking that you accept Dr. Bailey's recommendations. We stand here today because Rachel understands and accepts that she should be punished for her actions. But I believe more importantly, she hopes and prays for forgiveness from the Neese family, her family, and the community at large. Thank you, Ron.
Ms. Ashdown?
Your Honor, there are family members who wish to address the court on the subject of victim impact information. There are, I think, two people. David Neese, Skylar's father, will speak, and his brother will speak as well. So, Dave, I'm sure the court will entertain the close relatives who wish to speak. Am I correct, Your Honor?
That's correct.
Just whoever wants to come forward first, we will do so, and then.
Okay, and as they're coming forward, I would note, and I just want to note from my standpoint for the record, I've not received written victim impact statements. It's my understanding that none have been submitted. I just want to make sure that that is correct. I take that back. I take that back. I did receive, actually it's in the file, so I didn't see it before I looked at the file yesterday. I received victim impact documentation for restitution that Ms. Ashdown submitted on February the 5th. I have received and reviewed that, and we'll talk about that after we've taken the victim impact statements. But as far as receiving a separate written victim impact statement, I have not, and I just wanted to make sure that that's correct.
That is correct, Your Honor. Our people have just decided that they would address the court openly
That's fine.
in this hearing.
That's fine. That certainly is their right. Mr. Neese.
Thank you, Your Honor. Yes, Rachel Shoaf did tell us where Skylar was. Yes, Rachel Shoaf did cooperate. And Rachel Shoaf also murdered my daughter in cold blood. Skylar would not be where she was if it wasn't for Rachel Shoaf. You said yourself, Your Honor, this is first-degree murder. she should not give any leniency, and she can take her apologies and everything else and sit on them because that's about what they're worth to me and my wife. She has done nothing but make our lives a living hell since this day one. She did cooperate in the end because she knew that it was closing in on her, and yes, she would be caught. That's the only reason she feels remorse. Your Honor, I ask you to give her 40 years and plus if you can. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, just so the record is clear, I can't remember if Mr. Neese identified himself, but that was David Neese, the father of the victim. Thanks, sir. Ma'am, if you would introduce yourself, please.
I am Skylar's father, yes.
Yes, sir.
I'm Carol Michaud, and I'm Skylar's aunt and her mother's sister. And still to this day, we do not know why they did this. And that is a question we would like an answer to. Because what in the world would be so bad that you would have to kill Skylar and to put her through what you did? You didn't think about that when you were doing it, so why would we need to think about how you feel now? You stood there for over a year, comforting, being with us, telling us you knew nothing. When the police and everybody was coming close, then you decided to confess. You need to think about everything you put us, your family, and everyone else through with not being able to have the pleasures that other kids would have. No grandchildren, no marriages, no prom, no graduation. How do you think that would make us feel? You don't get it, and neither does Skylar, but at least your parents get to see your face, get to talk to you, and see you. We don't even get that luxury. They get to say goodbye to you. We never got to say goodbye or anything. And I hope that you really and truly regret for what you did, but it would never make us feel any better.
Sir, if you would please identify yourself.
My name's Michael Neese. I'm Skylar's uncle.
Yes, sir.
I worked on this for a long time, kind of a therapeutic thing for myself. I picked up things along the way, and excuse the less of emotionality if I may be over the top at some times, and I want to apologize ahead of time. First day, this all started when my wife called me at work and told me that Skylar was reported missing. Immediately, I made 200 flyers and drove over to my brother's home and asked him if he heard anything. Just complete silence from him. Seeing my brother so beside himself made me sick to my stomach. He walks me into her room, shows me where she climbed out of the window that night. I noticed right away her clothes she was wearing to work were folded. Neatly on her bed, the cell phone charger was still left plugged in, where she left it 3 days before. The room was very clean and the bed was made. So I started asking questions. Did she have a boyfriend? Was she having problems at home or work? She had no problems, he said. She took it upon herself to get a job and seemed kind of proud of it. Mary just comes home and introduces me to someone and says, "This is Skylar's uncle, and he loves her very much." I told her I heard Brian on the radio, and I lost it. I leave there, and I drive on to 705, and I go to the new Kroger. With flyers in hand, I started passing them around of people walking out of the store. And I couldn't understand why no one would take any flyers from me. So I began to start putting them on car windshields in the parking lot. Then I saw a man step out of his car, and he asked me if I needed help. I looked at the car windshield reflection, and my face was blood red, and tears rolling down my face. I saw an older couple near their car, so I walked over to them and handed them a flyer. And the man says, "We're from out of town." I just broke down, walked to my car, and went home. I couldn't sleep for 3 days. Later that same week, my brother calls me to have me pick up some flyers for him at a print shop close to where I live. So my wife and I did this. We got there, and of course, no news. And Mary and Brant look like they haven't slept for days. While at their home, a police officer stops by to speak to my brother. And at first I thought, okay, this is it, we finally got some news. But he asked my brother for some flyers that I just brought in for his usage. The officer stated that Skylar was just full of herself and should be home soon. I was furious. When you know from every ounce of your being, she didn't run away. The helplessness I felt was tremendous. My wife and I head home a few minutes after the police officer leaves. He's standing in front of a bar in Star City holding up a flyer to a woman there. This is a total nightmare. Months have passed. No words from police. Conversations through Facebook have brought nothing but finger pointing to our family, and no one knows other than their own conspiracy theories of what happened to my niece. Other than the defendant sitting here today. I know my stress level reached peak on certain days because I drove home from work 4 times and couldn't remember how I got there. My wife and I drove all over, posting flyers at hurry businesses in some cases. We were turned away because it wasn't in our policy for us to put anything related to this type of thing, if you believe that. A month has passed. Rumors about a party in Blacksville was mentioned, so I stopped by my brother's home and let him know we were heading that way. When I got to the area of the high school, we stopped by a gas station and posted flyers. We saw some kids and started asking them about a party. One guy said he knew Skylar from Facebook, and the other one didn't want to talk to me. He drove out and eyeballed me the whole time. Well, we posted the flyer in the store and we headed home. News broke out about a body being found 5 months later in and around where we were, close to it. My wife said to me, I wish we would have driven further instead of going home that day. All the time during Skylar's disappearance. While in the car, my wife tells me to look for Skylar because she could be walking on the side of the road or sidewalk. And to this day, Your Honor, I'm still looking. I went to a candle birthday vigil in February to celebrate Skylar's birthday, all along fearing the body found in PA was hers. My brother goes down to Charleston, West Virginia to promote Skylar Neese law, knowing full well that body found was his daughter. My depression hit bottom when I noticed the flyers around town were being taken down and a realization my niece was never coming home. Vertigo has ruled over me in latter months to the point where I can't drive and all I seem to want to do is vomit. I can't watch the news anymore because I'm afraid I might see my brother pleading for information on his daughter. May 25th, 2013, I went to the murder site for the first time. My thoughts were simple, disgusted, raged, and anxious. My brother again stepped up to take homage where his daughter was found, but I can't. Too many variables for me to process because that is where Skylar fought for her life and lost. I'm still trying to make sense of this and I can't. While at the site, I watched people show up and I really didn't talk to anyone and the silence was dismal. I saw Mary and my brother going down to the log lying on the ground. I assumed that's where Skylar was found. I can hear sniffles from both of them, and again, so quiet. I saw branches piled up next to a tree and assumed that's where were found there and put there by the FBI, and of course I couldn't stop focusing on them. Mary said, speaking to Skylar, "I told you about sneaking out." And my brother replied, "You see where that got you? So sad." Someone passes a shovel down the hill where my brother tried to dig a hole and plant some flowers for his daughter. With every hit of the shovel hitting the ground, I jumped and then I had to turn away. Mostly I kept thinking, I wish Brant would stop stepping all over Skylar. Towards the end, when the folks started talking, I leaned to my wife's car, and Carol says, "I just want to know why." A woman comes up and introduces herself, and I heard someone say, "Mike is starting to cry." So I restrained myself, said my goodbyes, and drove away, and I haven't been back there since. The last time I saw Skylar was at my mom's funeral. I walked up the steps, Skylar ran over to me and hugged me so hard. She put a kink in my neck. My daughter Sarah was going on and on how pretty Skylar was and even took a picture of her and shows me. I poked fun at her and remember her smiling at me when I did it. She was always thoughtful to me and to everyone else. I never heard a mean word against her. My niece is a kind soul, smart and funny, and she touched my life for the better. This is a tragedy. It's merciless and never should have happened. I hope in doing this for her shows you all just how much she means to me. I also would like to point out here today, I know in my heart, Skylar fought that night for her life, and now she's gone. Your Honor, I'm here today to fight for her as hard as she did to stay alive. The admitted murder sitting here today has nothing but blatant disregard for human life and deserves the maximum sentence for her role, and I quote, this extremely horrific and vile crime she committed on my niece. All the lies Ms. Shoaf gave to family, authorities, and the community has me thinking she's lifeless inside with no regret other than getting caught. All the tweets, going to school, tanning beds at church camp. And let's not forget the Facebook statements. Should be truth enough to see right through her. She may have admitted to murder, but at what cost, Your Honor? Showing no emotion or care in the world for 6 months. Should be dealt with no compassion towards her because she never gave Skylar 1 ounce of mercy. All the families here are ruined because of her actions. Life for life is what I read in the Bible, and simply put, she deserves no free life. Her parents couldn't reach her for some reason, and I know my family has suffered the loss of a daughter, cousin, friend, and a niece. Not to mention she'll never be able to experience being a wife, a mother, or a grandmother. Your Honor, this is solely your decision, and I will respect it. However, Ms. Shoaf getting a plea agreement just to protect herself, then I plead with you here today. 40 30 years, sir. The maximum by law for second-degree murder, reminding everyone here this was premeditated. It should have never been given a second degree on this act. Murder is murder. For the life she stolen from Skylar, she owes my niece hers. Believe me, sir, when I tell you Skylar is with us today, in our hearts, watching over us. She'll be with me the rest of my life. And as for the defendant, those given to harming others bear within themselves the seeds of their own destruction. Thank you very much.
Sir. Ms. Ashton? And actually, before you start, let's take care of the issue of restitution
Please.
so that I don't have to come back to that. As I indicated, I noticed that there was filed on February the 5th, 2014, a victim impact documentation for restitution by the state that reflects that the West Virginia Crime Victims Fund has paid $921.71 for counseling services for Mr. and Mrs. Neese. And also attached was a bill from the funeral home for funeral expenses in the amount of $7,262.22. And apparently that's not been reimbursed or paid, it was the impression I got.
It has not yet. There is that process that is going on. We
Okay.
expect a victim fund to pay for that, but in the meantime, the $7,000 and some is due and owing to the McCullough Funeral Home.
Yeah, so they are expenses that have been incurred. Mr. Angotti, I note that a copy of that was sent to you also on February the 5th. Do you have anything that you wish to offer with regard to the issue of restitution in this matter? All right, very well. I'll get that out of the way so that we don't have to address it further later. Okay, Ms. Ashdown, you may
Thank
proceed.
Your Honor. Skylar Neese disappeared on July 5th, 2012. This is what Rachel Shoaf finally told police on January 3rd, 2013. And this is information from the documentation of her statement to police on that day. She said, "We stabbed her," referring to herself and Sheila Eddy, stabbing Skylar Neese. They killed Skylar because the girls always fought with Skylar, and she was, quote, "in the way of the friendship between Rachel and Sheila." In the spring of 2012, Sheila and Rachel first joked about killing Skylar during science class when one of them said, "We should kill her." And they looked at each other with a sense of agreement on that statement. Sheila and Skylar, according to Rachel Shoaf, always fought, and the animosity between Skylar, or towards Skylar, intensified after Skylar accompanied Sheila to a beach vacation that summer. And we know from facts that such a vacation did occur. On July 5th, 2012, Sheila and Rachel agreed that it's today. Today was when they should commit the murder. Since springtime, the girls had several conversations about killing Skylar, and it was agreed that the murder should occur before Rachel left for church summer camp. The night was agreed upon because Skylar was working that night and into the evening and into the later evening. and she would be able to sneak out of her home easily after she had left work for the night. Over the month before the murder, Sheila and Rachel had planned some of the details and concluded that they needed to buy knives, get a shovel, and go to Brave, Pennsylvania, where this murder would occur. So on July 5th, Rachel Shoaf took a shovel from her father's home. Sheila Eddy brought 2 knives that belonged to her mother. And they waited outside Schuyler's home. They drove to her apartment that night. They called to say they were waiting for her. And she came out and met them, got into their car. Schuyler was under the impression that the 3 girls were just going to drive around, maybe drive up to Brave, Pennsylvania, where they had been on other occasions, and smoke some marijuana. So she had brought along a bong with her, and Rachel Shoaf had brought along some other smoking pipe. When they arrived there at that location in the countryside, the 3 girls got out of the car and were out of the car for some moments when, at the agreed-upon signal of a countdown, 1, 2, 3, Rachel Shoaf and Sheila Eddy attacked Schuyler Neese and stabbed her to death. Schuyler attempted to run away, but Rachel Shoaf tackled her. She told police. Rachel Shoaf described the scene as having lots of blood, and it was never cleaned up. Following the attack, and blood remained on the gravel road. Rachel Shoaf estimated that Schuyler was stabbed 10 times before she died, and she explained that during the attack, Schuyler Neese's neck made weird sounds, and they both continued to stab her until those noises stopped. At the time of the murder, Schuyler was dressed in a yellow tie-dye shirt and green shorts. She had taken a purse with her that was left in the car. They threw that purse away. They thought Schuyler's cell phone would remain where her body was left. And in fact, it was found there, Your Honor. That day before taking Schuyler in the dark of night, or through that evening, Rachel and Sheila drove around Star City and in the area, preparing themselves. They had concealed knives on their bodies that had been wrapped in towels by Sheila Eddy. And they took that shovel with them. And they arrived at Schuyler's home and told her they were waiting for her. They were waiting to kill her. Your Honor, this heartrending case has consumed us from the date we became aware of Rachel Shoaf's disclosure to police. The disclosure that she and Sheila Eddy had deliberately, intentionally, and premeditatedly murdered Schuyler Neese, according to a plan by which they had armed themselves with knives, had prepared to conceal Schuyler's body after killing her, and had taken materials and extra clothing to clean up. We struggled first to accept the reality, and then for months we spent hours, days, and weeks trying to ensure that the cases of Rachel Shoaf and Sheila Eddy could both be set on a course to accomplish as much justice as possible. Since that time, people reporters have asked, well, what lessons can we learn from this? What have you learned from this crime? And I have to say, I'm baffled. But maybe one lesson is that the evil of which humans are capable passes understanding and seems boundless. Maybe another one is that if this kind of crime can happen in this relatively small and cohesive community, it can happen anywhere. But these are not lessons that help me or anyone else, because I see no lesson here that tells us how to predict and prevent these heartless deeds. So as to why we're here today, for the sentencing of Rachel Shoaf, who participated in and committed such senseless evil, I only know how to speak as a law enforcement official and to ask for justice and for the lawful penalty to be imposed. We've heard and we're asked to believe that Rachel Shoaf has accepted full responsibility for the crime, that she solved the disappearance of Skylar Neese, that she's not the monster portrayed by the evidence. We're asked to believe that Rachel Shoaf finally became overwhelmed with guilt and remorse and freely confessed her crime. That Rachel Shoaf is a sort of hero in that regard. Not really, Your Honor, you know this case. Not really. In exchange for her statement on January 3rd, 2013, Rachel Shoaf extracted a benefit in the form of a lesser plea. Let's not forget that the history of the investigation is that the two defendants were questioned by police repeatedly over a period of 5 and 6 months following Skylar's disappearance. Let's not forget that they lied repeatedly and that they were communicating with each other to keep their lies straight, to keep them consistent with each other. Here's a list of when Rachel Shoaf lied to police. July 19th, 2012. September 11th, 2012. November 6th, 2012. November 30th, 2012. But it was the November 30th, 2012 interview when her nerves began to fray. Her lies began to fragment. And the stories about when and where the defendants had last seen Skylar Neese began to fall apart. It was that November 30th, 2012 interview when Rachel Shoaf changed her lie a little bit. She added something. And Sheila Eddy's lie didn't catch up with Rachel's lie until December 1st, the next day. That's when Rachel Shoaf began to understand how she needed to and how she might be able to reduce her exposure. That's when she came in from the cold alone and first. That's when she confessed for a price. She sold her confession to police for the ultimate bargain of her plea to second-degree murder in West Virginia. That's what happens to solve some criminal cases. And to the extent that Rachel Shoaf's confession, for which she extracted this benefit, assisted the investigation, she has been compensated by the agreement for her plea to second-degree murder, and therewith her sentence of substantially less than a life term. That is her reward, and it is more than sufficient. It is often said that children should not die before parents, that it is not the normal and proper cycle of life and death. But parents do lose children, tragically to illness, to accident, to negligence, even murder. Murder by a stranger is a horror, but deliberate murder by friends is unthinkable. It must be unbearable for Dave and Mary Neese to contemplate the fact that Skylar's friends hated her so much that they took her in the dark of night and stabbed her to death even as she struggled for life. They were single-minded and relentless. When we go through troubled times, we may wake up on a morning that seems new and trouble-free for the few moments until the trouble comes back to our minds. I imagine that Dave and Mary Neese wake up some mornings and that there are an easy few minutes until the fact of Schuyler's murder comes rushing back, and the unbearable must be borne again and again for the rest of their lives. Surely, no lesser sentence than those years of imprisonment available for second-degree murder is sufficient for justice here today. Surely, for this oh-so-adult crime of cold-blooded, planned, premeditated murder, there is no proper sentence other than an adult sentence. Surely, a sentence as a juvenile is unthinkable. If Rachel Shoaf has accepted full responsibility for her crime, she should not be asking to be sentenced as a juvenile. She should be willing to accept every day, every hour, and every minute of a proper adult sentence. Your Honor, you know this case. You know what a proper sentence would be. We ask that you impose that adult sentence.
Just so the record is clear, Ms. Ashdown, does the state stand behind the recommendation made in paragraph 3 of the plea agreement?
It is a recommendation, Your Honor, and it is part of the plea agreement.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure that we weren't violating the plea agreement. Mr. Van Gotti, Mr. Strathis, anything further?
Yes, very briefly, Your Honor, as you just pointed out, I didn't hear Ms. Ashdown state prior to that. We were here last May the 1st, 2013, and the plea agreement that was entered into that date was with the defendant, the state of West Virginia, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania consented to it, the federal authorities consented to it, and the victim's family was here and they consented to it at that time. The thrust of that plea agreement was that Rachel Shoaf would and did plead guilty to second-degree murder, that the state of West Virginia would recommend a sentence of 20 years, and that at this point we would have the opportunity to ask the court that she be sentenced as a juvenile. So nothing that was stated by us today is different than what was agreed to back on May the 1st of last year. And I believe the state, as you pointed out, recommended that 20 years, and they are still recommending that today, and we would simply ask the court to follow that recommendation at this time, and nothing that we can say, nothing we can do can make this matter go away, make it change, make it better. The only thing we're here today to do is ask this court to enter a sentence that was consistent with the plea agreement that was entered into based upon the actions of Rachel Shoaf prior to that date, including her cooperation. Thank you.
Rachel Shoaf, would you please stand? There are several issues that the court needs to address that are a part of sentencing in this matter, so things may not be done in what might be considered a normal sequence of events. As has been pointed out, there is a plea agreement, and that is an agreement between the state of West Virginia and the defendant and her counsel. That plea agreement contains the recommendations of the state with respect to sentence, and it also reserves to the defendant the right to make recommendations with regard to sentence, including sentence as a juvenile. At the time this plea was entered, this plea agreement was reviewed, and all parties were aware that the plea agreement and the recommendations contained in the plea agreement were that recommendations that were not binding upon the court because the plea was not offered as a binding plea. With that understanding, the court addresses the issues that have been raised. The first issue, the defendants reserved the right to make a sentence recommendation requesting that the court sentence the defendant as a juvenile pursuant to West Virginia Code Section 49-5-13E and or any other form of alternative sentence. I've not heard any request for any other form of alternative sentence, so I have no intention of addressing that. With respect to the request that the defendant be sentenced as a juvenile, the court understands that a juvenile transferred to adult jurisdiction does retain, I guess, if you will, the right to be considered for sentence as a juvenile. That is a determination that is left to the discretion of the court. That request has been made. That request is denied. This case was transferred from juvenile jurisdiction to adult jurisdiction, one, because it was mandated by law because of the offense committed by the juvenile. Under those circumstances, the court can conceive of no rationale under which it would be appropriate to then sentence a juvenile transferred under those circumstances as a juvenile, recognizing that to sentence the defendant as a juvenile would limit the court's jurisdiction over the defendant until her 21st birthday. That would by no measure be justice in this case. Accordingly, it is the court's intention to sentence the defendant as an adult as contemplated by the plea agreement. Consistent with that, Rachel Shoaf, for your conviction of the offense of murder in the second degree, the felony charged in the prosecutor's information in this case, it is the sentence of the court that you be imprisoned in the West Virginia State Penitentiary for a period of 30 years. The court assesses court costs as required by law, would order that you pay restitution in the amount of $921.71 to the West Virginia Crime Victims Fund, and in the amount of $7,262.22 to whoever ultimately assumes responsibility for that obligation, be it either the funeral home or the Crime Victims Fund in West Virginia or Pennsylvania or whoever. You will be jointly and severally liable for that obligation with your co-defendant Sheila Eddy. Although I don't recall addressing the issue of restitution at her sentencing hearing, so that will need to be addressed either by an agreed order or at a separate hearing, and you can take care of that at any time in the future.
Your Honor, just so you know, I have discussed that with Mr. Benninger, and we will enter an agreed order. We will offer that to the court
Very well.
in conjunction with this hearing.
Very well. Did not expect that it would be an issue. I would further order the defendant and Ms. Shoaf pay a one-time $10 fee to the Montague County Victim Witness Assistance Program consistent with the provisions in the code. The defendant has received the benefit of her bargain, and that was a plea to a lesser offense of murder in the second degree, an agreement by the federal authorities not to prosecute her federally, which, as I understand the law, they have every right to do, even and in spite of the pleas that were entered here, and the agreement of the authorities in the state of Pennsylvania not to prosecute her there, even though, as I understand the law, they have every right to do so. One other issue that I suppose needs to be addressed at this time, since the defendant is still a juvenile, and she will remain in a juvenile facility and a hearing will be scheduled prior to her 18th birthday so that a determination can be made as required by law whether she will remain in a juvenile facility past her 18th birthday or will be transferred to an adult facility. So I'll leave it to the parties to ensure that that hearing is scheduled. My guess is the juvenile facility will be contacting us to ensure that it is scheduled prior to Ms. Shoaf's 18th birthday. We will address issues relating to Ms. Shoaf's placement in an adult facility at an appropriate time and what measures will need to be addressed by the Department of Corrections to ensure her safety once placed in such a facility. At this point, I'm not aware of a DOC facility for the placement of adult females other than Lakin. And I'm not aware of how that facility is structured with regard to the ability to segregate inmates. And those are issues that we will have to address at a future date. I'm not going to attempt to address it now. Hopefully by then I'll have a lot more information with regard to what the facilities are there. Looking at my notes, a wise man once told me that sentencing hearings are not the place for speeches or sermons. It is not my place to understand or to explain. I understand that nothing that I have done or can do will make what has happened right for anybody. It is what it is. And as far as I'm concerned, this matter is concluded.
Remain seated, please.
And I lost it. I leave there. I drive on to 705. I go to the new Kroger. With flyers in hand, I started passing them around of people walking out of the store. And I couldn't understand why no one would take any flyers from me. So I began to start putting them on car windshields in the parking lot. Then I saw a man step out of his car, and he asked me if I needed help. I looked at the car windshield reflection, and my face was blood red, and tears rolling down my face. I saw an older couple near their car, so I walked over to them and handed them a flyer. And the man says, "We're from out of town." I just broke down, walked to my car, and went home. I couldn't sleep for 3 days. Later, that same week, my brother calls me to have me pick up some flyers for him at a print shop close to where I live. So my wife and I did this. We got there, and of course, no news. And Mary and Brad looked like they haven't slept for days. While at their home, a police officer stops by to speak to my brother. And at first I thought, okay, this is it, we finally got some news. But he asked my brother for some flyers that I just brought him for his usage. The officer stated this guy was just full of herself and should be home soon.
I was furious. When you know from every ounce of your being, she didn't run away. The helplessness I felt was tremendous. My wife and I head home a few minutes after the police officer leaves. He's standing in front of the bar in Star City holding him a flyer to a woman there. This is a total nightmare. Months have passed. No words from police. Conversations through Facebook have brought nothing but finger pointing to our family. And no one knows, other than their own conspiracy theories, of what happened to my niece. Other than the defendant sitting here today. I know my stress level reached peak on certain days because I drove home from work 4 times and couldn't remember how I got there. My wife and I drove all over, posting flyers and hurrying businesses, and in some cases, we were turned away because it wasn't in our policy for us to put anything related to this type of thing, if you believe that. A month has passed. Rumors about a party in Blacksville was mentioned, so I stopped by my brother's home and let him know we were heading that all the time during Skylar's disappearance. While in the car, my wife tells me to look for Skylar because she could be walking on the side of the road or sidewalk. And to this day, Your Honor, I'm still looking. I went to a candle birthday vigil in February to celebrate Skylar's birthday, all along fearing the body found in PA was hers. My brother goes down to Charleston, West Virginia to promote Skylar Neese law, knowing full well that body found was his daughter.
How can she cry when she
My
did it?
depression hit bottom when I noticed the flyers around town were being taken down,
She
and a realization
willingly
my
killed
niece was never
Skylar,
coming home.
and she can cry.
Vertigo has ruled over me in latter months, to the point where I can't drive, and all I seem to want to do is vomit. I can't watch the news anymore, because I'm afraid I might see my brother pleading for information on his daughter. May 25th, 2013, I went to the murder site for the first time. My thoughts were simple, disgusted, raged, and anxious. My brother again stepped up to take homage where his daughter was found, but I can't. Too many variables for me to process because that is where Skylar fought for her life and lost. I'm still trying to make sense of this and I can't. While at the site I watched people show up and I really didn't talk to anyone and the silence was dismal. I saw Mary and my brother going down to the log line on the ground. I also would like to point out here today, I know in my heart, Skylar fought that night for her life, and now she's gone. Your Honor, I'm here today to fight for her as hard as she did to stay alive. The admitted murder sitting here today has nothing but blatant disregard for human life and deserves the maximum sentence for her role, and I quote, this extremely horrific and vile crime she committed on my niece. All the lies Ms. Shoaf gave the family, authorities, and the community has me thinking she's lifeless inside with no regret other than getting caught. All the tweets, going to school, tanning beds, and church camp. And let's not forget the Facebook statements should be truth enough to see right through her. She may have admitted to murder, but at what cost, Your Honor? Showing no emotion or care in the world for 6 months. Should be dealt with no compassion towards her because she never gave Skylar 1 ounce of mercy. All the families here are ruined because of her actions. Life for life is what I read in the Bible, and simply put, she deserves no free life. Her parents couldn't reach her for some reason, and I know my family has suffered the loss of a daughter, cousin, friend, and a niece. Not to mention she'll never be able to experience being a wife, a mother, or a grandmother. Your Honor, this is solely your decision, and I will respect it. However, Ms. Shoaf getting a plea agreement just to protect herself that I plead with you here today. 40 years, sir, the maximum by law for second-degree murder, reminding everyone here this was premeditated. For the life she's stolen from Skylar, she owes my niece hers. Believe me, sir, when I tell you Skylar is with us today, in our hearts, watching over us. She'll be with me the rest of my life.
But Rachel Shoaf tackled her. She told police. Rachel Shoaf described the scene as having lots of blood, and it was never cleaned up. Following the attack, and blood remained on the gravel road. Rachel Shoaf estimated that Skylar was stabbed 10 times before she died, and she explained that during the attack, Skylar Neese's neck made weird sounds, and they both continued to stab her until those noises stopped. At the time of the murder, Skylar was dressed in a yellow tie-dye shirt and green shorts. She had taken a purse with her that was left in the car. They threw that purse away. They thought Skylar's cell phone would remain where her body was left. And in fact, it was found there, Your Honor. That day before taking Skylar in the dark of night, or through that evening, Rachel and Sheila drove around Star City and in the area. That they took her in the dark of night and stabbed her to death even as she struggled for life. They were single-minded and relentless. When we go through troubled times, we make those noises stop.
I think we all assumed that this sentencing hearing was going to go the same as Sheila Eddy's sentencing hearing. Just a bunch of nothing. No answers, no justice.
She had taken a purse with
but
her
wow, Marcia Ashdown described graphic, horrific details of how Skylar died. And you gotta wonder,
And in fact, it was
David and Mary Neese, were they in the dark on this? Like all these months, Marcia could have given them a heads up or told them how their daughter died, because they're searching for answers about every aspect of their daughter's death, the motive to how she died, and even her final moments. And do you really think the Neeses are first hearing it along with everybody else in this courtroom? I bet the Neeses thought nothing was going to be said today from Rachel, and especially not Marcia Ashdown. Wow. Newsball gives her a lot of credit. We thought she had nothing to give us. We thought she was letting these killers remain silent. But wow, Rachel's confession was loaded in January 2013.
Rachel Shoaf and Sheila Eddy could both.
One thing left out of that confession, though, Marcia Ashdown just went through a long list of details that Rachel Shoaf confessed to in January, and we're all just now finding this out in the sentencing hearing. One thing, though, that Marcia Ashdown did not bring up was what happened to the murder weapon, the knife.
What have you learned from
Rachel purposely did not confess to that. She didn't want to implicate her mom and or Kelly Kearns, her second mother, godmother since birth. She's known Rachel. Kelly Kearns, Patricia Shoaf, and Rachel Shoaf were on that boat on Sheet Lake the day after killing Skylar, and she threw that knife overboard. And Kelly Kearns on the Dr. Phil show went off when Sheila Eddy's family member stated what Rachel did on the boat. She got very defensive, kind of like to a suspicious extent. You know, there was no reference to Kelly Kearns, Rachel's aunt / godmother / second mother being involved. You know, she didn't see Rachel throw it off the boat, but Wow, Marcia Ashdown just went through the list of things that Rachel confessed to in January 2013. But one thing that was not confessed to was, where's the murder weapon? What happened to it? Because Rachel did not want to implicate her mother and her aunt/godmother, Kelly Kearns, who was a disrespectful, out-of-line, childish lady on the Dr. Phil show. Why? Because I had my moment to speak to Dr. Phil, and that lady, Kelly Kearns, went off. Out of line, disrespectful. Very, very defensive, almost like she had something to do with it, or she saw Rachel throw that knife off the boat, because she was not cool about the show at all when it came to the audio playing. I think they're going to cut that out of the segment, though. But, oh my God, did the Neeses just find out about this? About how Skylar died? They really had to find out in this courtroom with everyone else? Or did Marcia Ashdown give them the courtesy, common courtesy ahead of time in private? But, you know, all the Neeses' interviews and everything suggests that Dave and Mary were in the dark on this. I shook their hands at the Dr. Phil show, and Dave told me that he's been reading newsball.com's articles, and he said, as long as there was nothing about me, it was fine. And I was checking, you didn't write anything about me, so I was fine with it. I appreciate your coverage of this and exposing everything you did. So I can't believe Marcia Ashdown had this information about Rachel's confession, and she held it back until now. I thought we were going to get no answers, just like Sheila Eddy's hearing. So, wow. Marcia Ashdown gave an incredible final speech. It was methodical. It was just slow and methodical. It was powerful. And it was so compelling. But the details of how Skylar died, wow. The Neeses just found that out when we all did, just now. It was so intense. I can't believe that. You know, I want to know, did the Neeses have any idea? Did Marcia tell them at all beforehand, months ago? You know, they've been struggling to come to grasp with what happened in every aspect possible. You would think that she would have told them, but you look at Dave and Mary's faces in that crowd just now, and wow, that was just devastating to hear that about their daughter. And one last thing to point out, Marcia Ashdown did not want to get into the lesbian relationship at all between Sheila and Rachel, which has now been completely established. On the Dr. Phil show, Mary Neese shared how Skylar's diary describes Rachel and Sheila engaged in sex acts, and Shania Ammons on the Dr. Phil show described how Skylar told her that she witnessed Sheila and Rachel engaged in sex acts. And of course, Newsballs maintained this as the motive since day one, to the dismay of a lot of critics, saying, what are we doing, trying to get proof of a lesbian motive? That's absurd, that's ridiculous. Well, we found all of those sexually suggestive pictures, and now along with what Mary Neese is saying about Skylar's diary on the Dr. Phil show, and what Shania Ammons said that Skylar told her on the Dr. Phil show, and that our sources, our Sheila Eddy family member sources, and other sources, all stating that there is a sex tape and or photographs in evidence between Sheila and Rachel, and that Skylar was the one who filmed and or photographed it. So Marcia Ashdown did not want to get into that at all. I mean, she got very graphic about the actual killing, but she just did not want to get into the sexual stuff at all, which, you know, it doesn't serve a purpose, but Dave and Mary are searching for every single sort of answer. And on the Dr. Phil show, every guest was trying to provide them any and all types of insight, anything, no matter how far off in right field you might think it is. But I'm telling you what, we established that motive early on, and we've been vindicated because that's a fact. But Marsha Ashdown is definitely not going to touch on it at all. But just so you all know, that had something to do with it too. There was a lesbian relationship going on between Sheila and Rachel had a lot to protect, a lot to hide with that secret. She didn't want to lose her boyfriend. She didn't want her parents to find out. She comes from a strict religious family. And we established what her former best friend Natasha Wyrick said last week, and why Patricia Shoaf didn't like Natasha. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, go back and read that article. But wow, I give Marsha Ashdown props for this closing speech, because it wrapped everything up in a nice bow tie. She was compelling, she was methodical, and it was intense. She had all this information held tight against her vest all this time. We didn't know what Rachel said in her confession, but she said a lot. She definitely didn't touch on what happened to the knife, because she didn't want to implicate her mom, Patricia, or Kelly Kearns, her godmother / aunt, who were on the boat with her. And then, Marsha didn't want to touch on the lesbian aspect at all, because we're dealing with minors. But other than that, Marsha did a great job. She was thorough. She walked everyone through what these two killers did based on Rachel's confession a year ago now. So, wow. They kept that a secret until now. We thought it was going to be a bunch of nothing. But I feel like she did just shed some light on this. So I was a little bit too hard on Marsha Ashdown, because this sentencing hearing was an eye-opener. It was emotional, powerful, dramatic, and it was one of the best sentencing hearings I've ever seen, as far as getting some answers, feeling like there was some sort of closure involved in this thing. Wow.